All right, so what? I got to read the script from the bank. Okay, so what we had, you guys are going to get tired of hearing this. Okay, we had Paul Warburg running the Federal Reserve System of the United States, his brother Sidney running the Citibank in England, and his brother Max getting ready to run the bank over in Germany, the Reichsbank. But at that time, before World War I, he was just simply the head of the British Secret Service, which is the position George Bush had before he was president over here. Well, moving right along. Okay, we find that there's a connection between the intelligence services and the banks because it's imperative that the bank be able to run the government. It runs it through these intelligence services. If you want to read Spycatcher, an excellent book by Peter, gosh, what's his name now? I can't think of his name. Peter Wright, okay, who is the #2 man in British intelligence, MI5, for 14 years. Wrote a book and said that his key contact during that period of time was a fellow named Victor Rothschild, and that all of the knowledge that MI5 would develop instantly went to the KGB in Russia. He couldn't figure out how that happened because all he told was Victor Rothschild. And he was banned. He can't even come back to England. His pension was stolen. The Queen has a warrant for his arrest, and he's in Australia or something now. Another book called A Man Called Intrepid by William Stevenson, about how Roosevelt was entirely run by British intelligence before and during World War II. Every speech was cleared. Everything he said was cleared through British intelligence, and the scripts were written by them before Roosevelt said anything. So we find that through the banks, or by the banks, and through the intelligence services, the banks run the governments. It's extremely interesting to understand that. And of course, our friend George Bush has had some experience of that. All right, now, and so I don't want to overlook that point. George is one of the boys. Okay, now, so what they had to do is they had to get into Russia. So they had a fellow over here named Trotsky. Okay, Leon Trotsky. Trotsky had some. That was not his real name. His real name was something else. I forget what it was. Anyway, it was some New York name. Okay, it was not Russian. Okay, what he had was a bunch of hoodlums that he'd recruited out of the east side over in New York, and and they all changed their name to Russian, and then they went over in a boat with $20 million from Jacob Schiff, who was the senior partner of Kuhn Loeb Bank, and they met in what was called Petrograd, which is today called Leningrad, and I guess they're going to change that again. But anyway, with a fellow named Lenin. Okay, now Lenin had come from Germany, of course, initially, and he was given $6 million by Sidney Warburg from the British Bank through Alfred Milner. Well, anyway, so what I want to point out is these banks entirely set up the conflict that led to communism in Russia. And so they went over and they started the Communist Party, and then they decided they'd have a little meeting with the Tsar. So the Tsar got together with his family and everything, and they went in and they machine gunned the entire Romanov family. And that's how you end a blood feud. No problem. From then on, they had a red star in Russia, and the Rothschild flew from the mast, and it's been there ever since. All right, and the United States completely supported that with our tax money, because the taxes started in 1913, and they couldn't start world communism until 4 years later. Somebody had to pay for it, you see, because communism is a defunct form of government. It can't produce anything. It is a parasite, and it's an interesting thing if you're into parasitology. A parasite has two things that he has to do. He has to make the host think that he's necessary, you see, and then also he has to make the host ill. He has to make the host sick, so the host is unable to dislodge him. And next hour we'll talk about the AMA, okay, and things like that. Okay, because we see that the food industry in this country and the water industry is not here to make us well, is it? A sick host is always easier to control. The parasite requires his host to be ill. And so we run around with all these things, with Anacin constantly being advertised on TV and all this garbage. And we're just, health is something we're really not into until some guys, I guess in LA are, but that's about it. The rest of the world isn't too interested. It's back to the meat and potatoes and fluoridation. All right. I mean, it does kill germs. It also kills rats. Okay. So you'll have good teeth on your skeleton. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. Who wants to die with bad teeth? Okay. So we have Trotsky, who went over and started this whole nonsense over there. And so we find that, of course, it was set up the entire thing in Russia and so forth. I just wanted to show you how the banking sets all this up. I think we can go into lots of details. There's, at the end of the program here, I think Guy is going to go into some of the books that are available. The best books that I know of, the three best books that I'd recommend reading are, number one, The Unseen Hand by Ralph Epperson. It gives you a great panorama. See, it's necessary before you get into the specifics to see the whole panorama, just to know what part of this canyon are you in now, you know, when you read some little specific item, okay? Then the next book I would recommend reading would be Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. And then there's a little pamphlet back there called Billions for the Bankers. It only takes a few minutes to read it. Kind of gives you a quick picture. You know, if you just have a little bit of time, the Unseen Hand will take you a long time to read. But it's very profitable reading. You'll understand a lot more after you finish it. Then there's about 200 other books that we have in a book list that once you read those, then you kind of have the overview. You can see what area you're interested in and go for it. Different people are interested in different areas, you know. And so that's kind of what I would say for an overview. Okay, then of course we had World War I, and then we had World War II. When World War I, of course, got Russia into the communist fold and put all the Eastern banks, which were not too subservient to the Rothschild. That was the result of World War II. Was we went in and we gave all the Eastern European countries to the Rothschild Bank after World War II, and the United States comes back. The United States now has a function. If you go back to, it's interesting. If you really go back into the roots of this thing, you go back into the Talmud, which was written in Babylon, strangely enough, in the year 1040. I don't know if there's a coincidence there or if that's just another plan. Okay? But anyway, and it says that, of course, the Gentiles, which are your non-Jewish people, were just dogs. They're just the slaves and so forth, and they're to work for their master. And I have dogs. I have a German Shepherd, very nice dog, and he goes with me everywhere. And his job is to protect his master, and he does a good job. The job of the United States now is to protect its master. So wherever its master has a problem, whether it's Iran, Vietnam, or Korea, wherever, we go there and protect our master. Isn't that interesting? Our master is the Federal Reserve System. The United States is the colonial army for the Bank of London. And we've been the colonial army for the Bank of London since 1913. If you don't understand our foreign policy, it's because you don't understand banking. You see, the policy isn't really all that foreign. It's actually bank policy. It's not foreign policy, and we go wherever the bank wants us to go. So wherever the boys with the bank have a little need, well, then our boys go and we die and we bleed for that need. Now we understand the military. It's too bad. The reason that we're talking about it is because maybe if more people know something about it, we can solve the problem. Okay? Now, so that's, now that we discussed the military, we discussed World War I, we discussed World War II, Korea, Vietnam, so forth. Somebody is making some money, or it simply doesn't happen. Okay, now, so what we see was that in 1913 a switch was made. We switched from the Constitution to the Manifesto. Your senators here, your congressmen, some of them are exceptions, of course, have generally voted entirely for the Manifesto. They will not make any decision accidentally in favor of the Constitution at any time. Okay? And so it's important that we understand this, because we want to know which country our representative is representing us to. You see, because if he's representing us to America too, well, there isn't much point. And if he's not representing us to America 1, and he doesn't know anything about it, then we should either tell him or get somebody in who does know something about it, because that's where the solution comes also. But it comes from within us. The solution doesn't come from out there, and it doesn't come from them. It comes from you, and it comes from me. And it's tremendous, this power, you see. And tremendous power. This is the power which enables David to kill Goliath. This is the ultimate solution to all problems. As soon as you can do it, then you'll take care of it. Reminds me of the Aesop fable of the sparrows that were in the field. And the mother came back one day, and the bird said, oh, they were all excited that the farmer was out with all of his neighbors, and they were going to mow the field, and they'd have to go. And the mother bird says, no, don't worry, we're safe. And so about a week later, the birds came back, and they said, well, you know, it's really, the farmer was out here with his sons, and they said that they were going to come back tomorrow and mow the field. And the mother said, no, we're not going to worry about that. Don't worry. And so the next week, the farmer came out, or the little bird said, Mother, the farmer came out, and he said, and he was all alone. He says, well, tomorrow he's going to come out and cut the field. And she says, now, she says, children, we have to move. You see, as long as the farmer was relying on someone else to do it, it would never get done. That's probably a 3,000-year-old story, okay? It's just as true then as it is today, okay? If you're waiting for somebody else to do it, it ain't going to happen. You're just kidding yourself, okay? If you decide you're going to do it, aha, then something will get done, okay? And that's the story of human nature. All right, so what we're going to be talking about here is some information, hopefully, that can be given to you that will enable something for you to do. Okay, and something for me to do. This is what I do. You may do something else, okay? Oh, we got markers. Doug, try to erase markers. Bullet point, okay? All right. Well, let's take a look at this now. When the Communist Manifesto came in, it was the exact opposite of the Constitution because it abolished private property. And it, of course, did this through taxes and inflation. Okay, and we drew the chart showing the taxes and inflation when we started exactly what's happening. So it's kind of irrefutable that this is happening. Okay, now, what do we do to protect ourselves against this? Okay, the taxes and the inflation basically hit anybody who owned private property. Okay, so anybody who owns private property, oh, this is great. Anybody who owns private, let's start over. Okay, so anybody who owns private property, okay, will have a problem. All right, now here's how the boys in the bank, when they introduced the income tax in 1913, by 1908, from 1905 to 1908, they solved all of their problems. Because by the time their program was implemented in 1913, they didn't, listen, write this down, they didn't have any income and they didn't have any assets. How can you do that? Well, I was careful. I remember my daughter when she was in school, and she came home in the second grade. She was all excited. She said she learned some magic. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, she's, 34 now, I guess, and she's got her master's degree. She works as a pretty important job. But when she was in second grade, she came home and she learned this magic thing. She goes, look at this. She goes, da 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 da. I thought, that's really good, see? And so she says, not only that, but watch this, and she had a whole bunch of them. She goes, da 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 da. Okay, now, okay, we have just described central banking. That's all you need to know about central banking. Okay, how do you make ownership so it's not ownership? It's magic. Watch. It's called trust. What does a trust do? A trust makes it so you don't own the property. Now let me ask you, would you rather own your car or drive your car? Which would you rather do? Because drive means you're in control. See, somebody once said the definition of a pedestrian is someone who has a teenage child. Well, all right, so notice what happens. See, owning the car doesn't do you any good if the car is never home. So ownership really isn't where it's at. It's you want to control the car, right? So watch the dichotomy. There is a dichotomy between ownership and control. Control you want. Ownership, nah, just a problem. Liabilities and a lot of work, see? So the ownership of your property now is called, whatever property you have goes into what the Latin term here is for corpus, means body. So you have a body, and you grant or create, you are the creator or the grantor here, and you grant this corpus into a trust. Now, that means that you're going to have two trustees of a minimum of two trustees. So you're going to have trustee 1, you got to have trustee 2, okay, and you've got to have some type of a beneficiary. Now, we won't get into all what can be who or anything here because that's another story, another hour, okay? Now, what you've done here is that you have just divested yourself of ownership. You don't own anything anymore. You say, well, that's fine, but I didn't work for my stuff just so I could give it away, right? Okay? So what we want to do now is have the creator come over here. Remember we talked about Oliver Cromwell? He said, we don't want a king in England, we want a protector. Well, under English law, you have what's called a protector. The protector now of a trust, all he does is hire and fire trustees. That's all he does. Now, the protector also has you as the manager possibly here, and you in turn have other agents and so forth, and all you do is you write the checks and decide where the money's spent, okay? That's all. Okay, notice what we have over here is control. Isn't that interesting? Over here we have ownership, okay? So what you do by setting up a trust is you divest yourself of the ownership, but you retain control. Are we having fun? You now drive the thing, you just don't have to pay the bills. It's like being a kid all over again, remember? Okay. All right. What you do is you divest yourself of the control. Now, the income tax doesn't apply to control. Nobody has to pay an inheritance tax when he controls something. It's only when he owns something. Now, who owns the trust? And the answer is nobody. It's in trust. Now listen, this takes da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ready? This takes some real deep understanding. When this thing is in trust, nobody owns it. Because it's being held for somebody. Now, when the trust buys a piece of property for $100,000 and it sells it for $100,000, it doesn't have any capital gains tax because it didn't own the property. Are we having fun? Get it? No tax. No tax. Look, Mom, no tax, okay? This is hot. This is hot. There is no tax because there is no ownership. This is what the boys did in 1908 before they took in their manifesto as to replace the Constitution in 1913. This is the antidote. If you're ever out in the woods, you get poison oak or something, there's always an oak tree. If you take off the bark of the oak tree and there's sap on the inside, that's the antidote to the stuff that burns your skin. And it will neutralize the burn that the leaf gives you. Is this fun? See, because the leaf really isn't oak. The leaf is a little plant. What the oak is next to it, that's what cures it. Are we having fun? See, there's always in nature an antidote for every problem. Okay, the antidote to taxes is trust. Okay? Now, they did something else, too. Okay? That's the first thing. We won't go into it anymore here, except that towards the end I'll explain what our program is and how it works. And I think Guy's got another program that runs along, and hey, you know, free country, free world here, okay? But, and you can do kind of whatever you want to on that score, but, or you can see somebody else. You know, you don't have to deal with us. All we want to do is give you the information to put you in control. That's all. Okay. This is not too good. Should come off. Okay, there we go. I like the color, though. That's a neat color. Okay. Now, the other thing he did was he said, okay, if you have a job, okay, what they did here, they said if you've got a job, for example, okay, you have what's called a gross income, and that's where the term comes from because it's usually pretty gross. And then you have your tax withheld, and then you have your net. So if you make $50,000 in a job, or your family makes $50,000, you'll have about $32,000 of it missing because that's your money withheld. Oh, excuse me, $18,000 with missing. Excuse me. You have about $18,000 of this missing. Okay, which represents about 40%. Your paycheck missing, and you end up with $32,000. This is, I've just described to you the average guy in LA in the year 1991. Okay? Now, that's what income tax does, and Social Security does to this guy. Okay? He's pretty soon going to be up in the 60% missing and the 70%, and I think Sweden's already in 80%, or, you know, hear all these stories. This guy's locked in. He doesn't know that he's in control. If he doesn't know he's in control, then he's not. Okay, what they did was they set up another thing over here called business. This is important because this is what got business to back the income tax in 1913 after it wouldn't back it for 66 years. Why would business back it? Why would business be in favor of income tax? Doesn't make any sense. Aha, and thus we know more. Okay, what they did was they said, okay, you've got a gross income here, and now you deduct your expenses, and then you end up with your net, and then you pay your tax. Okay? And the flow goes something like that. Okay, notice there is one big difference between a business and a job, isn't there? And that is an extra box. One has 4 boxes and one has 3 boxes. This is a test. Okay, now, if the businessman, what's the value of the box? Well, if the businessman makes $50,000, on paper he will spend $50,000, won't he? It's just not hard. You don't have to lose the money. You just trade it from cash to some property or some type of an asset, and the transfer of property from one form to another is a deduction, isn't it? You don't have to lose it. Just transfer it. Donald Trump, kind of idea, he's got this divorce coming, so he's transferring out. The poor guy's broke. You see, all of a sudden. Okay? See, he didn't lose his property. He's transferring it, isn't he? He's not stupid. He's just having a divorce. Okay, now. Okay, now his net, so the net here is 0, and the tax is 0, isn't it? Now, which group would you rather be in? Take your time. Okay, see, notice what we're learning here. Okay, this guy not only can keep all his money, he gets to spend it, and he pays no tax. This guy only gets 60% of it, and he's taxed on 100% of it. Look at it, he's taxed on money he doesn't even get. But he thinks this is a great deal because he's been to school and he's adjusted. What does that mean? That means that his employer takes out $20,000, you see, and when he files his tax, he's only got $18,000 to pay, and Joe Lunchbucket gets a $2,000 refund. Is he happy? Oh, ecstatic. That is a week in Hawaii with his wife. And he's happy. He can hardly wait till next year. So if you go to the mall with your little clipboard and you ask people if they've got tax problems, you're going to find out they're going to say, oh, no, last year we got some back. That is adjustment. That's totally adjusted, okay? Now, what it takes to illustrate this was a story I think I read in the paper one time about a fellow back in Tennessee who had gone hunting. He had been hunting and he'd got lost. It was in the fall, the year was beginning to snow, and he couldn't find his way home. He couldn't find anything to eat. He couldn't find water. He was in terrible shape. So at the end of the fourth day, as this account went in the newspaper, he cut off his dog's tail and he made soup. And while he was eating the soup, the dog came over and looked rather mournful. So he gave the dog some of the soup, and he said that out of gratitude, the dog licked his hand. And I thought, that's it. That's the closest thing I can think of to actually having a tax refund. Okay, so what we did is we thought, well, we'd have a so we thought we'd put a seminar together and show people how to retain their entire anatomy every payday. Okay, now, and so you see, if a guy is happy with the system, it means one thing: he doesn't understand it. Either that or he's got a degree. Okay. Now, so what we found here was that that the average guy gets up and leaves his house here. He leaves his home at point A in the morning, and he drives to point B, which is his work, and then at 4:30 he comes back again. Ever notice this? Murphy has some new laws out. He says if you're a commuter, for example, he said the lane you're in will be the slowest lane, and his corollary to that is unless you should change lanes. Okay, now, so what happens here is that this guy does this every day now, 40 hours a week, and after 40 hours every week, he's broke. So what does he do? What's his response? Next week he does the same thing. I mean, like, this guy really doesn't catch on that this is not the solution to his problem. Okay, 40 years later, this guy's still doing this, okay? So we call it the 40-40 plan because he's broke after 40 hours every week, and after 40 years he gets to be broke permanently. It's never dawned on him, this isn't the solution to his problem. Because he's adjusted, you see. Now, and there are some fringe benefits, like 2 weeks out of every year, this guy can go about 150 miles from home because that's where his nearest relative is, and that's all the money he has, okay? And then he comes back and he repeats this process for another 50 weeks. Is this guy happy? Very happy, see? So we thought, well, how could we explain it? So we got, some people call this the rat race, so we thought, well, we'll get some hamsters, put them in there, see what happens. So we did some surveys, and we found it's an interesting thing, that if we put a hamster in a cage, he does exactly the same thing. He runs around in his little wheel. So the only difference we discovered, by the way, was we found if we ever let this little guy out for 2 weeks, he never came back. And so we thought, what we were able to learn from our experiments is that apparently one of the species is more intelligent. And we thought, well, now what really, what is the difference? What is the difference between this guy and this guy? And it came up, this guy's been to school. He's adjusted. This guy's not adjusted. You see the problem? See, so so we have to triumph over our adjustment here, okay? Now, so what we're talking about is that this guy never really realizes this is available over here, okay? So if we look at it more closely now, see if we can get this erased. Not easy. Working on it. Okay, is that about 95% of the people in the country, as Guy was talking about, are over here, and only 5% are over here. Isn't that interesting? See, because only 5% of the people know about this. You see, I have a lot of fun with trust. See, because every time you present a trust somebody, this guy's going to go, well, if you can do this, how come everybody doesn't do it? And I'll say, that's a very good, being a salesman, don't you? That's an excellent question, sir. That's an excellent question, sir. Tell me, why didn't you do this last week? And he says, I didn't know about it. He says, you just answered your own question. You just answered your own question. Nobody knows about it. Okay. See, and that's the answer. Because in all of the schooling, in all of the news media, in all of the publications, this is never mentioned because the Federal Reserve System doesn't like it. Got it? And if it doesn't like it, you don't see it. But aren't you glad we don't have censorship in this country? Whew. Oh boy, you see? This thing is run entirely for the benefit of our lender. This is not good for the lender, and that's why you don't learn it. Okay? Now, how we get out of this thing is we learn some things. Is this fun? We learn some things, okay? Now, remember Paul Warburg back there? He said, well, we're going to set up two kinds of people, guys with business, guys with jobs. Okay, what he did was he designed two kinds of forms. Okay, so we're learning that there's two kinds of people. There's a business and there's a job. Okay, now, what is the difference, basically? Well, let's take a look at this. First of all, we're going to define what a business is. And I like to be very basic in my definitions. It reminds me of the football coach. Every spring practice, he'd hold, the first thing he would do every spring practice out in the field, he'd hold up a football, and he'd say, gentlemen, this is a football. And finally, one guy showed up in the last row, and he said, hold it, coach. He said, not so fast. Okay, so we're gonna try not to go too fast this morning. Okay. Okay, what is a business? Okay, now I'm going to spare you the agony of my opinions. I'm not even going to read what Webster says because we don't care. Here's what the Congress tells us a business is because it writes the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code, the IRC. See, notice this, Internal Revenue Code equals law. Okay, it's written by Congress. It's important to understand these things. IRS represents an interpretation. Okay? And it's called regulation. Get the difference? That's what they think the law says, but they're not sure because it hasn't been to court yet. They don't want their definitions to go to court because it may change. Because they make most of their money down here. They don't make it up here. Now, the reason that okay, you've heard of tax attorneys. You can't even find them in the Yellow Pages. What are tax attorneys? Well, tax attorneys work for corporations. And they tell the president how to operate up here. You don't want to work by IRS opinion. You're going to come out on the short end of the stick, aren't you? But yet all we ever see in H&R Block classes, we call it preparation H&R, okay, and all these things, all you hear is that they teach this. They're really not teaching this. You see? Now, in order to be free, you got to know what the truth is. That's what Jesus said. Shall know the truth, truth to make you free, okay? You didn't know he was talking about IRS, did you? Okay? Now, so what happens here is he was way ahead of his time. Okay, so what happens here is that, yes, we have to go back to the source. We have to see what in the world are these definitions, because we know what Orwell says, that, you know, definition benefits the powers that be. Remember, if you print the money, it's called counterfeiting, and if the bank prints it, it's called inflation. See, the definition is not what's being done, it's who's doing it. Oh boy, he calls this doublespeak or doublethink. See, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool communist or a socialist, okay? And he said, now listen, it's important where Orwell's coming from because he's not a very positive type of guy. He said on his deathbed that the history of man, or the future of man, because he didn't believe there's any solution to this, the history of man under socialism is a man's face with a boot on it. And that's what we have to look forward to. That's what he had to look forward to. Well, thankfully, he didn't know everything, okay? Because I don't think he'd ever read the Bible, okay? But, you see, that's what you look at when you just look at what IRS says. Because that's exactly what they're talking about, okay? We're going to go to the law. And we're going to talk about the difference here between the two later on here. Okay, remember, the regulation is just simply their interpretation. Well, I can have my I could actually print a regulation and go and say, here's what my regulation says. It'd be just as good as theirs, wouldn't it? Because neither one of them went through Congress. Get it? Now, the world is living under this interpretation, and it's wrong. And most of the time, it's wrong. Okay? So, going under the law now, the law says that a business is any endeavor that has a profit motive and economic activity. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that you're trying to make money, and you either spent some money or you made some money or both. Well, that's not too hard. Now, the regulation comes along. Now, what they're saying now in the regulation are the things like you have to make a profit 3 out of 5 years. Well, notice the law doesn't say that. And as a result, we see some interesting things. Lockheed, for example, hasn't made a net profit since 1938. IRS has not declared it a hobby. See, you say, how can that be? Well, they have a tax department, and they know what they operate under the America 1, which is the law. America 2 is the regulation. Get the picture? Which country do you want to belong to? It's up to you. The control comes from within you, but the education system is designed to make it so you don't have the option, because if you don't ever hear of anything, you don't have the option. A guy named Perry once said it's impossible to be ignorant and free at the same time, because if you don't know what the options are, you can't be free. The public education in this country is make sure you have no options. Okay? Now, if I taught this class over here at USC, well, I'd be thrown out, because the function of that college president is to make sure no education occurs on the premises, isn't it? That's his job. What college president's ever been fired because the education was poor? I mean, it's only if it's too much, right? If he's radical, you see, that's too much information. Shows up as radical, rad. Okay? Okay, so they operate on these regulations. Well, okay, we don't want to operate. For United Airlines, for example. This is incredible. United Airlines, okay, since 1947 has not made a profit. We're talking, what, 44 years? These guys have been operating an airline in the red. How can you operate for 44 years an airline doesn't make any money? The answer is Joe Lunchbucket gives them his taxes. It's called a subsidy. Well, you'd think these guys were friendly, wouldn't you? Okay, so notice what we're learning here. See, these guys have been running this airline on other people's money. Well, hey, it's called taxes, you see. Now, here's the thing. I flew down yesterday on Pan Am. Pan Am's an interesting airline. Pan Am, now listen, is being bought by United. Now, how can a company that hasn't made any money for 40 years buy another airline? Some things they didn't teach us at Harvard, huh? Get the picture? These boys don't ever operate at a profit. That's the last thing you ever want to do. Isn't that fun? Got it? Okay, because if they got a profit, they simply buy another airline. Whoops, in the red again. Well, more subsidies. See? And this is where our money goes. This is incredible. Okay, now, profit motive economic activity. All right, let's take a look at this now, because there's two forms. One for the guy with the business and one for the guy with the job. Because these forms were invented by Paul Warburg. If you take a look at the first form in 1913, it's totally intelligible. You can recognize it instantly because it looks so much like the form in 1990s. And also the form in the 2000s. And the form in 2003, when all private property will be confiscated except for the 5%. Because that's what it's coming down to. You got your choice. Which boat you want to ride on? You want the Titanic or you want the life raft? Titanic's a lot more popular, more people on it. Okay. Do not be in the band, because they played Nearer My God to Thee as the ship sank. Okay. Okay. Now, what happens here? Okay, you had a form called 1040. Okay, here's a 1040 form. You've probably seen one before. That was the year the Talmud was written. Oh, get in back. Okay, now, so what happens here? You dirty dog. Now, so what we have here is wages. Okay, $50,000. Okay, if you don't have any adjustments, then the adjusted gross is going to be $50,000. Not too hard to figure out, is it? The reverse side over here goes something like this. You have this $50,000 carried forward, and now you have your deductions. You've got your exemptions. Let's say you're married, you got your standard deductions, $5,200. You've got your exemptions. Let's say there's 4 in the family, and there's 2050 times 4. This changes every year, but you're looking, what, about $9,000 or something like this. Okay, now, you've got $13,200 here that you deduct from your $50,000, which gives you something like $36,800. And your tax on that now for federal and state is going to be about $10,000. Not bad, is it? See, that's what the average guy's tax return looks like, something in that area. Okay? Now, if you have a job. Now, if on the other hand you have a business, then you have remember it had an extra box? Well, the extra box comes with an extra form. Sort of like Cracker Jacks, you open this box up, boom, another form. And we have here what's called a Schedule C, Schedule D, Schedule E, Schedule F, Schedule K, all these different schedules called Schedule C. Name and address of your business. It doesn't take long for this pen to run out. I think what these pens need to do is sit upright. That would be better. I think there's ink in, it's just at the other end. Now, so we have here income. Okay, here's the income that this business makes. And it has expenses, doesn't it? We have expenses. And we have net. So let's assume you start a business and you actually make $3,000. How much money could you spend? Well, you had the $3,000 from your business you could spend, and theoretically you had the $50,000 from your job you could spend, right? Because they work together. Now let's suppose you didn't really spend all of your money. Let's just assume here that you spent, well, let's pick a number at random. Let's say you spent $39,800. And you subtract your 3 from that, and it's $36,800, isn't it? You had a loss. Is that right? Something like that? Is that right? No, something like that. Okay, I never was good at math. I could never figure it out. I could only figure out taxes. Okay, now, so what we have here is your business now. Okay, your business now, what does it have? It has a loss of $36,800. Now, I got to ask you a quick question. If you made $50,000, is it conceivable you could have spent 36 of it? See, we're not asking you to do anything you didn't do last year, are we? Only we're asking you to account for it differently. Instead of having personal expense, because you remember your Schedule A says personal itemized expenses? Oh, bad. Have Schedule C, business expense. The power's in the C. Okay? Don't go to Schedule A. Okay, now what happens? Okay, this changes. So now what have you got? You got something like $13,200, don't you? Can you see what's coming? Okay, you got $13,200. Now you subtract from that your $13,200, and that comes out something like 0. And your tax on that is 0. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Got it? It's no more complicated than second grade magic. It's about as complicated as that. And some people won't believe me. We went to a meeting last night, a mortgage meeting. I loved his approach. He says, some people aren't going to believe you can get an interest-free mortgage. He says, for those of you who don't believe it, we have a plan for you. It's to go out the rest of your life and pay interest. See, if you don't believe this, that's fine, because all that means is that you're going to pay tax the rest of your life. That really doesn't do me any harm. But it does my grandkids a lot of harm, because you're funding the system that puts them in the funny farm, okay? So to make sure my grandchildren don't have any problem, I'm out here talking to you, because the only way my grandchildren be free is if you're free. I got that one figured out. See, it's like a torch. You have to pass it on. See? If I pass this on enough, I can look my grandkids in the eye and say, hey, kid, did it for you. Okay, now, okay. My grandkids, they're 8 and 10. They're not quite sure what I'm doing yet. But they will figure it out someday, I hope. Okay, because this is how you pass freedom on, as the Bible says, to your children and your children's children. You're supposed to give an inheritance. What type of inheritance are we giving them with all this debt? It's a negative. You know, one of the most gross anti-family things I've ever seen, and I know it's done in jest, is this bumper sticker, I'm spending my children's inheritance. This is as anti-biblical as you can be, because that's exactly the opposite of God's plan for his creatures. It's exactly the opposite. You see, because this is what happened in Israel in the old days, that there was an alienation between the children and their parents, and the whole nation collapsed. And one of the marks of the Messiah, as Malachi talks about, is he's going to restore the fathers to the children. This restoration takes place, you see, because right now we are not only not giving our children anything, we're piling debt on them. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to our children. The worst thing imaginable. I mean, we wouldn't think about going down and getting some poisonous toy for them. We're giving them something worse. You see, and then they make a joke out of it. We're spending their inheritance. Ha ha. It's nauseating. It's just the opposite of what should be going on the planet. Exactly the opposite, you see. This thing is exactly the opposite of God's plan. You don't know where that comes from. Hey, this comes right out of the pits of hell. I'm totally convinced of it. See? Now, the way that you fight it is you expose it. 2 requirements of a conspiracy. It must be secret. It must be illegal. It was against the Constitution. It was secret. Qualifies in my book as a conspiracy. Okay. The way that you get rid of it is you illuminate it. You expose it. Because it can't exist if it's not secret. Is this fun? It can only exist as long as you don't understand it and your neighbor doesn't understand it, then he'll pay it. See, we call it an ignorance tax. It's really not an income tax. You can make a lot of income and not pay it if you know something. Okay, so here we have this form now, this Schedule C. Let's take a look at it. What kind of expenses could you reasonably expect to take? Okay. Well, if we ever get this board erased, we'll get into that subject. Okay, we're going to take a look at certain expenses. Now, there's something like over 200 expenses that you're entitled to if you have a business that you're not entitled to if you don't have a business. You can find these in. You can go down to the stationery store and get a Dome book. For example, Dome puts out a book on business expenses and business support. I mean, this is not secret and esoteric data. You can find it right down at the store, okay? There are all kinds of things. Let's just go through half a dozen. For example, you and your spouse probably have a car. Let's assume that your car, you drove your car 15,000 miles, and that your spouse drove the car 15,000 miles. So both of you drove the car 30,000 miles. Now, one of the things important is in 1967, the Supreme Court came down with a decision that said that they could not determine what a part-time business was. Because if you're in a business all the time, because a business is an entity. It's a legal entity. For example, does anyone here go to a part-time church? Do we have any part-time Christians here? See, even if there was a guy here, he wouldn't say anything, would he? Okay. See, notice what the assumption is, that he's in this all the time, isn't it? Isn't that fun? Because it's illegal. Now, marriage. Anybody here in a part? Well, we won't get into that. Okay. Now, okay. So the assumption is that if you're married all the time. That's the legal assumption. Okay. The assumption is of the Supreme Court that if you're in a business, you're in it all the time. And so since 1967, no government publication, no IRS publication has mentioned the word part-time business, because there is no such thing in the eyes of the law. You're either in a business or you're not in a business. Is this fun? You're in a business all the time. You're in a business while you're asleep. Henry Ford goes to Europe. He goes skiing. Does he still write off his plant at Dearborn? Yes, because his presence isn't required. He's not taking that deduction because of where he is. It's who he is. He's not even taking it because of what he's doing. He goes down to Cabo San Lucas for the weekend. Does he write it off? Yeah, he may be doing some business down there someday. But because he is a business, he writes it off. Now, naturally, the trip has to do something to the business, so he has to have receipts, he has to have records, and we'll get into that in just a minute. He has to identify that this is, in fact, a business activity. Yeah, question? Oh, you're stretching. Okay. Long day. Okay. All right. So what we have here are some interesting things. Okay. So now there's 30,000 miles that he and his spouse, or she and his spouse, her spouse, drive, and the gas, what is it, $1.50 a gallon now? So there's $4,500 at 10 miles per gallon that this guy can write off because he's got a car. Well, he had a car last year. He put same miles on. Gas may be a little more expensive. But now, not only that, he can depreciate his car, can he? That portion that's used for business can depreciate. We're just going to go 100%. Actually, we don't recommend going 90%, but it's too long to go through all the calculations, so we'll just show you quickies here. This is just a real fast one. Depreciation, okay? Let's say okay, same thing. Let's say his wife has a $12,000 car, and he has a $12,000 car, so we got $24,000 in cars. You can take about 20% of that the first year, roughly speaking. Okay, so you're looking about, what are you looking at, $4,800, right? Look at this guy. He's got $10,000 he can write off because he's got a car. Are we having fun? Mm-hmm. See, if he doesn't have the business box, he can't deduct any of this. Now, this is what's never taught when you go even to the HR block schools. They don't spend a lot of time on the schedule. See, they spend even less time on a 1040X where you go back and you amend the returns, because you get paid for just filling the forms out, filling the forms out, filling the forms out. All you get is $40 a form or something, pop, pop, pop. If you spend any time to explain it, you lose money. The other guys in the room make more money. So the system is set up so anybody who explains this to you is severely penalized. Besides that, he doesn't want to do the audit. Well, what else have we got? We've got your meals outside the house. Breakfast, lunch, dinners, theaters, entertainment. Okay? You wouldn't leave the house anymore if it wasn't for business, would you? Do this. See? You couldn't. Matter of fact, you couldn't. You're in business all the time, aren't you? So your meals outside the house, breakfast, lunch, dinners, theaters, entertainment, golfing, bowling, recreation, all this stuff is somehow related to your business. You have to keep records. Next module will show records. But the expense here is very interesting, because let's assume that you and your spouse each spend $15 a day outside the house. Pretty minimal, right? Okay, so that's $30 a day times 365 is about $10,000. Now you can take 80% of this, because they cut back to 20%. I'll show you. They gave it actually on things like depreciation and what they call the item 74, where you can expense certain things. So where they take it away from business, they also give it back. What they do is they take it away from the individual. See? Okay, so entertainment would be $8,000 because you ate food outside. Well, you could also write off if food inside the house were used for your business. That would be a write-off. Well, everything you're doing, everybody's over there seeing you. You have people over for dinner. Okay, would it be reasonable to assume that 25% of your groceries are consumed by others while they're over at your house? Do this. Okay, now, what are you doing while others are over at your house? Well, you're eating with them, aren't you? So another 25% of your groceries are consumed by you while others are over there. Well, this brings us to the result that 50% of your groceries are used in the conduct of business. You have to keep records. We'll go through that, okay? Now, let's assume your grocery bill is $150 a week, okay? Times 52, we're looking at about $7,500. Half of that, okay, about $3,700 or so is deduction. We'll call it demonstrations and training or sales promotion, whatever you want to call it, is deductible because you ate food at home. Now, come on, fess up. Some of you have been doing this all along, haven't you? Okay, now what you haven't been doing is deducting it. See, never am I suggesting that you spend more money. Well, you can't. You spend it all, right? So you can't spend more money. You just reclassify what you are spending. Is this fun? See, people often ask me, they say, what does it cost to go to your seminar? I say, well, it's usually free or, you know, a few bucks, but it costs you like, you know, $10,000 a year to miss it. Okay? All right, then what do you got? Well, travel. Okay, anything more than 50 miles from home is business travel. Reminds me of one of our clients last fall. He and his wife, they ran an ad in the Honolulu Inquirer and wanted to know, and to see if anyone wanted to be in their business. And then they flew over, and he said they waited for 2 weeks to see if anyone would answer the ad. Okay, and he came back, and he was very disappointed. He said it didn't go too well, and so they had to also go again this spring. Okay, now, and so we had $3,000 here. Okay, okay. Well, the guy was trying, you know, profit motive. Yeah, I'm just reading the book, profit motive. Okay, all right, that's what it says. Okay, now we had one fellow also wrote off a mobile security unit one year. We found out because it barked and ate dog food. Okay, and so if you have cats, you may want to have them apply to your business as sort of you know, rodent control devices, or if you're into birds, you may want to go for aerial surveillance. Okay, and so we add these things up here, and you see with just a half a dozen things, we got what, 4, we got 16, we got 24, you know, about 25,000 things right here. Do you think with another 190 items we could get to 39,000? If you got any problem, if you got money left over, you can't figure out what to do it, call us, we'll help, okay? Now, see, so what we're talking about is that, like, this isn't really difficult. You're already doing it. If you know, it's just that now you have to have a business and deduct the items, okay? Now, we talked about record keeping. Yes, you have to show that you actually spent these things for the process claimed, okay? Let's go through record keeping real quickly here. It doesn't have to be too complete, just to give you an idea where we're going, okay? This is not for any specific use. This is a general application of these expenses. Each person will have his own specialties. Okay, this is getting harder. Okay. All right. Now, let's take a look at some things. Okay, your profit motive. Okay, you want to remember we showed profit motive, and we had economic activity, right? Okay, now these are the ways in which you spend your money. Is that correct? Now, profit motive, economic activity is going to show up as how you spend what? How you spend your money, right? So this is your money, is that right? And profit motive means that everything you do all the time is for business, so this is going to be your time, isn't it? So here's how you spend your time. So you're going to keep track of two things now, money and time. Now, you will not have to spend more than 3 or 4 minutes a day on this. 4 minutes a day will be max. If after a month or so you work on this, you find that you're spending more than 4 minutes a day, give us a call and we'll give you therapy, okay? Because it won't be a bookkeeping problem, it'll be a mental problem, okay? Now, so what we want to show here is that anybody, really, if he wants to, can do this. It's really not that hard. Okay, now, we have here, okay, what kinds of type, well, what do we got? What's that? What is it? Oh yeah, why don't you pass them out? Anybody that would like to know how to do this, we'll give you a call. If you don't like to, if you don't want us to call you, don't give us the card. It's real simple, okay? Then that way nobody's called or bothered. Because if you want to pay tax, we don't want to bother you, okay? Now, but seriously, if you give us a card, we'll give you a call, and I'll come down here from time to time, and Guy will probably be working with us in some things here, and we'll take care of your needs if you like. Okay, as far as showing you how you do this, our first visit is free. It will just give you a free estimate, what we can save for you and what it would cost. And you can either do it or not do it, okay? It's up to you. No obligation, no commitment. Okay, what kinds of time would you have? Well, let's take a look. We know that there's personal time, and we know that there's business time. Isn't that right? Now, based on our discussion here today, how much of your time in the future do you think would be related to personal use? None, okay? So notice carefully, you will have no personal time. Notice how this clears this whole story up for us now. Not complicated. You only have one kind of time. It's business, isn't it? Okay, what kinds of money are there? Well, there's only three ways I know of you can spend money, okay? One is with checks, one is with credit cards, and one is with cash. That's the only way you can spend money. Isn't that interesting? So there's the kinds of time and money we have. I mean, you can spend years studying this. It's called bookkeeping. You know, save your time. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, the next thing would be the records. What kind of records do you have to have? Well, to show your time, you want to have what's called a daily diary. Okay? Now, the daily diary is going to show the things that the people you see during the day, the people you talk to on the day, every day, and the things you do every day. So your daily diary is going to show see, phone, and do, because that's the only three things there are to do every day. And this isn't like infinite. It's not a big problem. We just have to categorize these things and put something down, okay? All right, now, for records, what do we need? Well, for records, okay, we've got our canceled checks, got our canceled credit cards. Okay, what else do we do? Well, we need to have over here, we need to have really sort of a cash log, don't we? We have a cash log, and the cash log is going to keep track of all your cash because you're already keeping track of everything else. So you're already doing a lot of it. It's just not maybe complete. Okay, now the next question here is what kinds of entries do we need to make? Okay, the entries that we need to make, by the way, the cash log, I can show you what that looks like. We produce those. See, here's my daily diary like this. Daily diary yesterday, daily diary day before. See, I'm in business all the time, no problem. Ta-da-ta-da. Okay, now here's our cash log. And here's the categories, and here's all the stuff you put down. Put the receipts in here. We'll explain how to do all this. If you have a trust, you may not even have to file a personal tax return because the trust will file a return, and you may just work for expense reimbursements. In other words, the trust just reimburses your expenses. See? In other words, if you go out and you spend money on behalf of this trust for food, shelter, clothing, travel, and so forth, the trust reimburses you the expenses. That's not income. Expense reimbursement is not income. Isn't that interesting? So you may only work for $1 a year. You just have your expenses reimbursed. What do you want money for? That's just a problem. See, now the trust will have to file the return, but that takes the problem off you because now you don't have to make any money if you don't make more than a few dollars. You don't have to file a return, do you? Is this fun? You just disappeared. See, you know, Sun Tzu. Another interesting books. Two interesting books that you got to read. One is The Prince by Machiavelli, okay, and the other is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Marvelous book. He talks about how you win. It's a 2,500-year-old book, written, what is it, sometime before Christ, okay? And he says that when the enemy is more powerful than you are, your best strategy is to be not seen. You can't beat his logic. I remember one time when I was drafted back in the early middle 50s, and we ended up at Fort Ord. And we had a big old black drill sergeant that came out 4 o'clock in the morning, standing out there in the misty rain under the lights. And he says, I've been in this army 27 years. He says, every one of my buddies is dead, been shot by the enemy. And he says, there's only one reason I'm standing here. I remember this. I remember every word of it. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. You don't forget it. He says, it's because in 27 years of fighting, he says, the enemy never saw me. He says, young troopers, we have 16 short weeks to learn this. Because that's the only thing that's going to keep you alive. And I thought, wow, that is really interesting. The way you stay alive is that the enemy doesn't see you. Well, if you don't have a tax return, what's he going to see? Are we having fun yet? Okay. Why fight over a tax return when you don't have to have one? Let the trust do it. It makes you not seen. It's invisibility. It's your cover. Yes, sir.
Who wrote The Prince?
Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli. 1412.
About the Art of War.
Art of War, Sun Tzu. S-U-N-T-Z-U. 500 years BC. Best military strategy ever written. Marvelous book. Everybody that goes into the CIA has to read that book. before they take their first class. It's a primer, because he's the father of military intelligence. He says if you know your strength and you know your troops, you will win 50% of your battles. He says if you know your strength and your troops and you know the enemy's strength and his troops, you will win 100% of your battles. Fascinating stuff. I mean, really, you can't beat it. When the enemy is bigger and more powerful than you are, the best strategy is invisibility. Don't be seen. It's not as hard as it sounds. Don't file a return. Now, if you got a job, okay. And the guy's got another program, this untaxed thing. That's not what we're doing. We got a sort of a moderation of that, or I should say a modification of that, okay? And, you know, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. If you don't like one program, you might like the other. You know, it's a free country. We don't have a monopoly on anything. Okay, you may even like somebody else's plan. You know, just all we're doing is giving you the necessary information so that my grandkids don't live in slavery. That's why I'm here. Okay, and the only thing that's going to protect them is you. Okay, because if you live in slavery, then it's going to be harder for them to get out of it. Okay, and we don't want to pass the system on to them, do we? Okay, entries. Okay, as far as your time is concerned, okay, you want to put down the name of the person that you're with, the relationship that that person has to your business, and the reason why you had that meeting. Sales, promotion, you know, consulting, whatever. And we'll go through this and we'll explain. As a matter of fact, we'll even give you a 3-month supply of record-keeping materials absolutely free when we see you and show you how to do all this. No cost. If you don't want to come in, don't come in. You can keep the records anyway. Okay, as far as the entries now over here are concerned, you want to put down the date that the money was spent, the amount of money that was spent, who the money was paid to, the category that it was paid in, and the receipt. You always want to get a receipt, no matter what. The receipt is the thing that proves that you had the expense. Okay? So you may even, well, I found that if you go out to the shopping centers at night, there's usually some laying out there, okay? And you can, and what this does is that it improves the ecology. It actually helps the place if you pick these up, okay? And if you have a difficulty with this, we even have a client in Burbank who has a multi-level receipt business. So, you know, not to worry, okay? So, I mean, this isn't like really serious stuff. Oh, goodness, it's hard to do a serious tax seminar. But I mean, hey, you know, the point is, if you spend all your money, just keep the receipt. Okay? If nothing can be disallowed, you've got the receipt for it, don't you? Okay, that's the time and the money. Okay, the next question would be, let's see how much time have we got here. Let me just go through quickly then. I think probably some aspects of law which you might enjoy. What we want to show is that you remember we said that there was the law. Okay, so we have what's called, we'll call this common law, because common law is the law that's made by common people, whereas a law that's made by an emperor is imperial law. That's the definition of it, okay? So under common law, we have a very interesting thing that takes place in this country. Under common law, okay, you have a series of things that take place, I should point out. You've got the law that's actually made by the legislative branch of our government and signed by the president, don't you? The executive branch of our government. Okay, and I guess I really don't need that top line to go clear across there. We'll make it like this. Okay, now you have, after a law is made, it's made into what we call a code. There's military codes, insurance codes, tax codes, all this. That's done by legislative analysts within the legislature, okay? And then, if you don't like this, you can go to court. And you can maybe have a judge hear it in a judicial case, or you may even want to request a jury. So you can get a jury trial. Okay, so this is the way our law works. This is set up by the Constitution, because that's, you know, that's what we learn, 8th grade civics class, that's what we learn, right? Common law. The problem is, only 5% of the people, when it comes to taxes, are ever participate in this. The reason is that it costs you somewhere around $250,000 to complete this process. Okay? And so, not that many people want to spend that kind of money on their tax. If you're talking about actually going to a civil case, getting a jury trial, so forth and so on. You're talking mega bucks. Okay. So what people do is that they opt for what we call imperial law. Okay, and imperial law over here has an interesting thing. They have what's called a interpretation. Remember that? Remember we had two things, the law and the interpretation of the law. Remember we had two things, money and a note. The old America had money, the new America has notes. The old America had law, the new America has interpretations. See, think, two Americas, okay? Now, what do we have here? We have a regulation. The new law is a regulation. The interpretation, is a regulation. And if you don't like the regulation, you can have a hearing. That's called an audit or an appeal. It certainly sounds fair, doesn't it? Okay, until we look at it a little more closely. And we find, if we look at it closely, that, for example, the interpretation was made by IRS. And then we take a look at the regulation, and we see that the regulation was written by IRS. And then we go to the hearing, and we find, oh, the hearing is conducted by IRS. And this is a surprise now. The next part you won't expect at all. The IRS usually decides that its interpretation was correct. And what do they say in the cartoons? That's all, folks. The only way you can change that is to go here. You got an extra $250,000 just kicking around? No problem. Or you can go to a little court that they design here called tax court, which is really supposedly a legislative court, which is not a judicial court either. There's no jury. Remember King Charles got his head cut off? No jury. Star Chamber Court, that's what tax court is. Okay, not too problem. See, these problems have all been solved. And when you take history, you realize they've been solved. That's why you can't have the history. Oh, boy. All right, so what happens here? Well, you go down here to your tax preparer or whatever it is, and he doesn't tell you all this, does he? Isn't that interesting? And because what? He has 4 problems. He's got 4 big problems down here, this tax preparer, doesn't he? Number 1, he has to be trained, and he's trained by the IRS toady H.R. Block. And then he has to be okayed. He has to be able to do these taxes. So he has to, in the state of California, he has to be what they call licensed, or has to have a number. Okay, and that can be revoked so that he can't do them anymore. And then his review is he's audited by these guys, maybe, you see, or whatever. And not only that, but he gets all the information from these guys and so forth. I mean, there's just a lot of things here. Okay, and he can be put out of business anytime the IRS wants to put him out of business. They just audit all of his clients. That's simple. You don't go back to that guy next year, do you? Solves that problem. And they can put these guys out of business anytime they want. This guy has his, this is George Orwell with the guy's face with the hobnail boot right on top of it. Okay? And this guy now, he does the thing he's supposed to do. He collects money for his master. Because his master is the one that decides whether he can do this next year. You don't decide that. IRS does. And if he doesn't collect enough, he's got some problems. So he wants to make sure he collects a lot. Besides, he doesn't have much time to help you anyway. He's too busy, right? Okay? See, in the old days, in Jesus' time, they had people who were tax collectors, and they called them publicans. And they were considered hated. They were considered traitors by their fellow neighbors, you remember? And because they would take money from their neighbors and give it to the enemy, the hated occupying Roman army. And of course today these people are called Republicans. So anyway, so as we go along, we find that, okay, if we're waiting for someone else to solve this problem, we'll wait a long time, won't we? Because nobody's going to solve this problem for you. But you can solve it for yourself. Got it? The control is inside. I just hope that if there's anything you remember tonight, that you're in control. Because with the information, you're in control. The IRS is second fiddle compared to your power. This is important to remember, okay? Now, so what you're doing now is that you have to maybe take this guy to court. Now, there was a case like this up in Morgan Hill, California, a few years ago. There was a dentist that did for years and years and years had a business that lost money. So the IRS came and visited him. Could you tell us something about this business? He said, yes, I'd be glad to. He says, come and I'll even show it to you. So he went out behind the house into a barn, and he said, see this horse? And they said, yeah. He said, that's my business. And they said, that's your business? And he said, yeah. He says, actually, it was a terrible thing happened. He said, 14 years ago, I bought 2 horses, and I was going to raise and breed horses. But he said, a terrible thing happened. He said, the first year, my stud died. And he said, I had all this money wrapped up in this big breeding horse, and he died. And so meanwhile, I've got this mare on my hands. I'm trying to save enough money to buy another breeder, and I just, I haven't got it yet. So meanwhile, I'm writing off all of the food, shelter, land, and everything for this horse. And they said, well, we have this little regulation that says if you don't make a profit in 3 out of 5 years, then that's a hobby. And he said, gentlemen, he says, I don't understand. This couldn't possibly be a hobby. And they said, why not? And he said, because I hate horses. And so they said, well, no, we're not going to buy that one. And so they disallowed his horses as a hobby. Well, he ends up taking it to the Supreme Court in 1981. Okay, he took it to the Supreme Court. It appears in the front page of the Wall Street Journal finally because he'd already gone to IRS audits, 3 of them. He'd already gone through tax court. He'd already gone to federal district court. He'd already gone to courts of appeals. See? This guy kept losing. See? And finally he gets up to the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court said, well, it would not be reasonable to assume that a man for 14 years would get up every morning and shovel manure for a hobby. And so since there was some work involved, therefore it wasn't a hobby, it was a business. And whether he made any money or not isn't incidental because they went by the law. Notice they didn't go by the interpretation. See, the Supreme Court doesn't sit there and cogitate over the interpretation. As far as they're concerned, that doesn't exist. Because it really doesn't. It only exists in your mind. It's a mind trip. It's psychological warfare. That interpretation really isn't there. See, isn't this fun? Okay, now, because you're going to go here. Now, and so they asked, so the Wall Street Journal, they interviewed this guy, says, God, how come you spent $250,000 on this horse? He says, well, he said, I wouldn't have done it except I'd written off $650,000 on expenses. Well, all right. You see, so it was profitable to him. But you see, that was an article you could put in the paper because that was a safe article. Because Joe Lunchbucket isn't going to go down and do this. So they could print it, you see. If Joe was going to do it, then that doesn't show up. So it was kind of everybody in Wall Street had a good chuckle. The guys in the bank had a chuckle. The guys in the IRS probably had a good chuckle. Because he's the only guy doing it. But, see, you can do it too. Okay, now, 95% of the people down here, okay, are following this system, and it isn't even a law. It's just that they're conned into it. This is America 2. This is America 1. Get the picture? There's different people. There's different businesses. There's different laws. There's different forms. It's a different world. It's a different country. Which one do you want to work in? See? Now, so what we have now is a situation that would take you, just like a corporation, all the way through this. We got our ideas because we do the same thing for you that a tax department does for a corporation. Okay? Let me show you how this works. We work with different companies, different places, different times. We don't just work with one thing. I'm just a tax consultant. I just consult with you, and I can refer you here, and I can refer you there, if you really want to do these things, okay? But what you're getting with me is just simply the consulting, the information that will empower you to do this. But you still have to do it. I can't do anything if you don't. If you don't have the records, we can't win the audit. Or, come out with what we call a check back audit. We don't just like to do audits, we like to get a check back. In other words, whatever tax you paid in prior years, we get that back. We like to be very expensive when we go through to IRS. Okay. All right, so what we have here, let's say this is you, and you've got an income of about, what do we say, $50,000 a year. So here's your income of $50,000 a year. Okay, and which translates to $4,000 a month. Okay, that's a year. Okay, now, your tax on that, your tax loss, I'm going to call it loss, is about $1,000 a month. That's the average person's tax loss on a $50,000 a year income, as we discussed, okay? Now, what we do is we put that into some other categories for you here, okay? The cost, and we put cost in parentheses, or quotes, because it's only going to be a portion of what we save you, is 5%. So 5% of your $4,000 here is going to be $200 a month. In this particular case, it would cost you $200 a month to solve this problem. We, in turn, have some various things here that we will be glad to show you. There is the consulting fee, and there is the support. The support runs $50 a month, and this is, the guy was saying, is an organization called United Sovereigns. The consulting fee we're working with here would be $150, because that's the remainder here, and that's the fee of us telling you what to do and how to do it, and helping you, showing you how to do it. Okay? Now, so there's your fees, $200. What have you gained? Well, you've gained $800. See? You've gained $800 a month. And the cost is only a fraction of what you saved. Hey, what a deal. See, this is not bad, is it? Now, the consulting firms we work with one organization. It's called Temple Trust. And the reason it was called Temple Trust is because when we started it, when they started, we went into the Bible, and we thought, now, what would really be a safe name? So we read in Revelation 15:8 that the temple was filled with the smoke of the glory of God, and no man was able to enter. And we thought, aha, we'll have that one. We thought maybe smoking temple a bit much. Okay, now, so we just called it Temple Trust. But you see, it's almost like, we wanted to sound kind of religious because people regard income tax as a religion. They regard it as some kind of a sin tax. Okay, and they think that if they don't pay it, then they're sinful. But I mean, people really have this thing. It's like a lock-on, you know, that, oh, you go down and you pay this tax, then you're absolved of all your guilt. See? Because you go down the street now and you tell the average guy, well, I'm not going to pay any more income tax, and he's going to say, shame on you, see? And so he's not going to quite know what you're guilty of, but he's been triggered to think that you are guilty somehow. Well, okay, so that's our story. So that's basically how we would pay for it. Okay? If you want me to, I can go into some of the multi-level on United Sovereigns, or we can break. You want to do another 3 minutes? Okay, we'll do another. We've even set it up so that if you do the United Sovereigns program, it's a business. So if you don't have a business now, you've got one, okay? Or you can get one, you know. Or if you've got another one, this is just something that doesn't take any time. You can add to it, and it's easier to take the deductions if you have a couple businesses, okay? Let me just show you quickly how this works. Now, you see, not everybody understands business, and for that reason, I'm just going to conclude with this little story that really shows, you know, how the ladies really kind of understand business more than men, because they got, it's like, what, 82% of all the money out there is owned by ladies. But anyway, which shows you men are really smarter. Okay, now, and so we have, this young lady was walking along the forest one day, and she was walking along the path, and she encountered a frog. And so instead of jumping away, the frog spoke to her and said, "Kiss me, I'm a prince." And this gal says, "You're kidding." Now, she'd always heard these talking prince stories, talking frog stories, but she'd never seen one. So she picked up the frog, put it in her purse, and went on through the forest. Well, about an hour later, this frog is croaking away, and he said, "Why don't you kiss me?" He says, "If you kiss me, I'll turn into a handsome prince." And this gal looks down at her purse, and she says, "Are you kidding?" She says, "Handsome princes are a dime a dozen." She said, "I could make $1 million off a talking frog." Well, okay, so what we have, you see, is some people can see a business and some people can't. So I guess if you have questions, we'll go ahead and take them, and then maybe be on the tape or it won't. But I do want to thank you for coming by today. It was really nice, and God bless, and keep the money in the country.